like you. It's not just TV, it's a game changer. PBS Hawaii, home is here.
Local broadcasts of Insights on PBS Hawaiʻi are made possible by the support of viewers like you. Mahalo, and by Carl Smith Ball, providing legal services throughout Hawaii and the Pacific since 1857, making a positive difference in the communities where we live and work. Changing the way our state government operates, from expanding voter access and imposing term limits for legislators to overhauling campaign fundraising. Numerous proposals have been floated, but with the clock winding down on this year's legislative session, which measures have a chance of becoming law and which ones have already fallen flat? Tonight's live broadcast and live stream of Insights on PBS Hawaii start now.
Aloha and welcome to Insights on PBS Hawaii. I'm Darrell Huff. In the wake of multiple scandals involving local leaders, the push for so-called clean government here in Hawaii continues at the legislature. Tonight we're looking at where Hawaii's government reform bills stand. We look forward to your participation in tonight's show. You can email or call in your questions, and you'll find a live stream of this program at pbshawaii.org and the PBS Hawaii YouTube page. Now to our guests. Camron is the program director at Common Cause Hawaii, a nonpartisan organization that aims to curb the excess influence of money in politics and promote fair and honest elections. Colin is public policy analyst and director of the Matsunaga Institute for Peace, as well as an associate professor with UHERO, the University of Hawaii Economic Research Organization. Judith Wong is the vice president of the League of Women Voters of Hawaii. It's a nonpartisan organization working to protect and expand voting rights and ensure everyone is represented in our democracy. And Robert Harris is the executive director of the State Ethics Commission. In 2022, he co-chaired the Commission to Improve Standards of Conduct, which was started after 2 state lawmakers were indicted in a bribery scandal. And let's start with you, Robert Harris. What has happened? What progress have we made since those big scandals? And the scandals also included things like the abuse of power by the Kealohas and the Kaneshiro case. There's been a lot going on when the Fed showed up. What kind of progress have we made since then?
Thank you for the question, Darrell. Let me just start with the premise that there's probably no silver bullet to eradicating corruption in government. And so, there's going to be a difference of opinion, I think, on, have we done a lot or have we done anything at all? And, I would be of the mindset that quite a bit has happened. That is very positive. There's steps in the right direction. Does more need to be done? Absolutely. So as a result of the scandals, the House of Representatives created a commission to improve standards of conduct, which we've just called the Foley Commission in honor of Dan Foley, who was the chair. I was the vice chair. And it was a terrific collection of individuals who were served on that commission. And there were approximately 30 recommendations that came out of that. And a majority of those have now since been passed.
Can you give me an example of a couple things that have changed that might actually make an impact?
Sure. Well, I'll give you one example. We've mandated ethics education for all state employees and for all lobbyists. And we just hit 90% of all state employees, which is roughly 45,000 state employees have now gone through ethics training with no additional cost to the state. So, again, it's, education's always a good start, and it's really where you have to begin. And so I think it's one concrete thing we can point to and say some positive improvements happening there. We've seen redefined definitions of fraud and bribery with the intent of making sure the state is able to prosecute these types of situations in the future, and we've really increased our criminal capacity at the Attorney General's office to be able to go after these types of things in the future.
Kevin from Common Cause, have you seen progress in the last, 4 or 5 years?
I think you have seen marginal progress. I think to say that there has been none would be facetious. So I think that leadership, let's take just even this year, right? Leadership taking on in the House to grapple with House rules that was a change. Did it go anywhere significant? That's a matter of opinion, but that is a change from where they have been at. So I would give them that one.
You know, Colin Moore, one of the things that I'm aware that changed is that within the processes of the legislature, there's a little bit more, we're on video, they're more on video, the paperwork seems to be flowing better. They've got consent rules between the committees now. Do you feel like there's been progress, at least among lawmakers talking among themselves?
I think absolutely. I mean, and I think the fact that, you know, now there's a new speaker, I think there's a little, but of course the former speaker, Scott Saiki, I think was reasonably open to some of that. I think it's also the public is a little more aware of how these internal House rules or legislative rules affect the progress of legislation. But the point you made about video is a really interesting one. I mean, that was sort of, I would call that a freebie. That's not really something that I think people thought of as an ethics change. It really was something that came about through COVID because the legislature needed to conduct hearings, and so they started videoing them on YouTube, and that opened up all sorts of possibilities for public oversight, because all of a sudden it was easier for the public to participate. You can zoom in and testify before you had to go down to the Capitol and wait forever. And the other thing, and I think this has particularly helped journalists, is that you can go back to the tape. I mean, it's like watching a football game. You can say, well, what did they say here? And go back to the tape and rewatch it. So that wasn't exactly thought of as an ethics reform, but I think it did have a lot of implications for transparency.
You've described about 50% of my job now. Is going back.
You don't even have to leave your office now, Daryl.
Sit right there at my desk, yeah. Judith Mills, what about you? What perception what have you perceived as being changes since these big scandals supposedly woke everybody up?
Well, I think, honestly, I would say that it's been like a stepwise process. So the Foley Commission had some really good recommendations, and they have been kind of gradually being put in place. Even now, there's still some that are working their way, hopefully, all the way to the end gate. And some of the proposed changes in terms of the procedure, the internal procedures, not all of them made it, but the idea that it started. So I would say it's more like we're on a stepway process and we're making some headway. You can make the rules still have to be followed. People have to buy into the fact that the rules are worth following in order for it to really turn around an atmosphere of getting away with things.
You know, one thing that just occurred to me as a question, and I'll just throw this out, and maybe start with Robert again. You know, do we have a lot of corruption? Or is it just an occasional bad apple? What do you think? I mean, a lot of people just think government's corrupt. I mean, is that true?
I firmly believe that, 98% of all state employees really are there because they care and are passionate about it. I think there's probably 1% of employees that push the envelope on what is permitted, and you might have 1% are bad apples. But that being said, you really hit the heart of it, which is it's the perception and the confidence in public government that is really critical to address and to make meaningful steps to address that. Because, again, democracy works when you have confidence that your elected leaders are there to serve the public and not themselves. And so, I do believe it's critical to make meaningful reforms and to change the culture, right, in a way where you really see those demonstrable. So you saw recommendations coming out of the Foley Commission which weren't directly related in any way to that particular corruption, but things like transparency and the fact that when people submit testimony that it's visible, those types of things are intended to instill confidence. That's really what I think our job is to do.
Judith Mills, as a particularly a long-time resident and somewhere close to my age, have you noticed things getting better over time, over a generation, say, from Hawaii? Because we had scandals, big scandals, 40, 50 years ago. And now we've got these little...
It's like watching the tide come in. Sometimes it doesn't seem like much, and then all of a sudden it's a lot. I guess the thing that I've seen consistently is I think there's still a problem with contractors. And, Robert can speak to it, but there's an important bill going through this time to help kind of address that. But I think that if you compare us to other states and other jurisdictions, I don't think we are awash in corruption, but we could be better.
Camron, I'd like your perspective on that. I mean, you have lived in other states. You've lived in other states that are not exactly known for the most honest governments.
Absolutely.
Louisiana, right?
Tennessee.
Tennessee.
Tennessee, good old Rocky Top.
Yeah, so what do you feel like this is a corrupt state?
My experience comes from living between Indiana, Tennessee, and Alabama, respectively. So I would disagree with everybody, or there's people who've spoken at this table so far, that I do think there's a lot of corruption here. The corruption may not be malintent.
So what do you think, what's the form of it then?
I think you have a lot of undisciplined actors who do things and cut certain corners, not realizing that that's an actual rule and actual law. Be it I'm going to meet with somebody for a lunch and not report that they paid for my whole lunch. Like I'm asking you as the Ethics Commission, would that not be a form of corruption?
Yes.
So that happens all the time here.
So sort of the good old boy thing.
Oh, they do it better than people who invented it in Tennessee. I think that's what's remarkable to me, is coming from the people who invented it and seeing it perfected out here. You have it in the form of that. I think that you prime yourself for corruption too when you give all your power to one person or to one entity. And then you open up, okay, is there any quid pro quo going on there, which makes even more of a look in depth too. Also, not just on the state level. Look at our local counties too. We're not absolved from this at all.
Sure, and then when you start bringing procurement into it, and we're going to talk about that. Colin, I would like your perspective. I mean, as a professor in this field, how would you rate Hawaii in terms of corruption, or is it just a different kind of corruption, as Camron is saying?
I think we're below average. I mean, I would claim we're a little more corrupt than the median state. But it also depends on what you mean by corruption. I mean, I think people have a sense that corruption means, stuffing bags of cash under your car seat floor, and of course that did happen here. But it's not usually how this works, right? I mean, it's usually a much softer form where it's about access, right? And so
you're either in or you're out.
You're in or you're out is killing this bill because I've expressed some doubts to you and you're my classmate from back in the day. I mean, is that corruption or is it advice? I mean, I think we really enter into a gray area here, and I think Hawaii has two other things that might contribute to, I think, what Camron says, which is this really cozy atmosphere, right? We're a very small state. Nearly most of the government work happens right here in Honolulu. Most people know each other. And so it's not like California where you're unlikely to have these repeat interactions. And I think that means that it's easy to make those connections because you know people. Second, it's extremely costly here to call people out. In other words, to accuse someone of acting in a corrupt way, because you will burn your connections from here on out. And the other thing is we're effectively a one-party state. And so we don't have a strong opposition party, I think, performing that watchdog role. It's really just journalists. And the Democratic Party here doesn't have much of an incentive to air their dirty laundry in public. So you don't have that additional check.
So let's now talk about this year's session and the bills that are coming up and what might make a difference. We've just talked quite a bit about contractors, and I know that you're particularly interested in one particular bill. Can you describe that for us and tell us how that's doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So when, let's just talk about lobbying for a quick second, just to define what it is. So when someone's paid.
And you guys at the Ethics Commission, you guys regulate lobbyists.
Correct. So we regulate lobbyists at the state level. And so, I like to say there's no such thing as bad or good lobbying. Lobbying is a function of government. You're going to have people who have specialized knowledge who are going to come and speak on bills. So generally here in Hawaii, the definition of lobbyist is someone who's paid to speak on behalf of someone else. And you have a lot of nonprofits and others who are registered as lobbyists who are just representing the public point of view. And you have what we might classically think as a lobbyist, which is somebody representing large corporations for large sums of money. So again, lobbying happens, and most of our laws are really intended to create transparency. So both legislators and the general public can see and know about it. All of the laws in Hawaii, and Hawaii is on the forefront of establishing lobbying laws in the 1970s, have sort of been stuck there and haven't really seen a lot of adaptation over time. And so one of the things that we're really proud of is a bill that is moving through, which is basically saying if you are approaching a high-level government official on the executive side, or any government official, but on the executive side in particular, pushing for a contract, pushing to sell your product, pushing to build something, and you meet the definitions of lobbyists, you're paid, you're doing it on behalf, and you meet a certain time threshold, you're going to have to register as a lobbyist, and we're going to have transparency around that. Let me just emphasize, billions of dollars get spent on contracts in the state of Hawaii every year, and we have a very decentralized system, so it's just a wide range of departments and divisions that are overseeing the spending of public money, and the idea that we don't have a lot of transparency around that is alarming and concerning, and why I think this bill is particularly important and good.
So from a specific point of view, so if I was a business person who had a construction company and I want to influence a project getting built that I'm pretty sure I can get, I go to the state Department of Accounting and General Services. How would I have to report that? What kind of things would I be prevented from doing that I might be doing now?
So I'm trying to avoid to get too much into the weeds, but if you're approaching the director, the deputy director, sort of the high-level people who really have the ability to influence, or the governor even, and saying, I really want to build a bridge here.
Like appointees?
Appointees. It's a defined list. It's kind of what we consider the high-profile decision makers. And it includes some boards and commissions, too. And you're really advocating, hey, I have a great technology. You should buy my product, or you should build this here. And you would have to then register as a lobbyist and report it. And there's some restrictions that come into that as well. Lobbyists aren't allowed to buy gifts for people that they're trying to talk to, for example.
You can't even buy them a lunch, right?
No.
Not even a lay.
You can buy a lay.
Oh.
As long as it's not a money lay.
Oh.
Important distinction.
Well, $1 one, that's not too bad. Please, other folks, what other bills do you guys want to talk about that are out there?
I think the contractor bill is a fine piece of legislation that is taking a concrete step towards corruption for all the reasons that Robert laid out and more. I mean, the name of the game, if you are going to attack an avenue, you definitely want to go through corporate spending as best you can and make sure that anybody who's seeking a contract is having to put that up front, because I mean the name of the game is to make money here, and it being such a decentralized state makes it easy. So I think that would help with, I think what I said in the first question about it being a little bit undisciplined, kind of tightening that up. I think that's great. And then the partial public financing bill is still alive.
Describe that.
So what that one is doing is it's taking our current partial funding, which is constitutionally mandated.
Well, go back to the very beginning. What is partial funding? Or what are we
Partial
talking about
campaign
here?
financing is what we're talking about. Is if, say, somebody wants to run, can they go to the state and get any type of financial help to run? The idea behind this is that it wouldn't be an elitist show in order to run, that the common person who may not be the most wealthy could run a competitive race. We actually have it in our Constitution that we should have some type of system. So this isn't something new. This isn't something that was just like randomly thought of.
Well, we have a system, but it's just not very generous.
It's not competitive because the prices haven't changed since 1995. Now, I don't know about many things, but in 1995 in Tennessee, gas was still under $1. So with that,
Tennessee.
Right, I don't know what it was here, but I doubt it was $5 like it is now. So if we just look at random inflation between now and from 2025 to back to 1995, if we look at just the progression of the wealth of the dollar, it's not competitive anymore, and it needs to be updated, and it hasn't been, and the legislatures are actually taking this on.
Judith, I mean, you're very interested in elections. How do you feel about that? Is that
League has for generations, well, maybe just decades, been pushing for full public financing, and we would love to get full public financing. The bill died this term, as it did several terms before it, but
what's the difference between partial and full public financing, other than the words partial and full?
Well, basically that's the difference, is it would give candidates enough money that all of the candidates could, in fact, just use that financing and be not have to seek financing from contractors, from PACs. Yes. We would like to have a situation where people owe their allegiance to their constituents and not to their contributors. So League would like full public financing throughout the entire United States. We're not getting that anytime soon. But without that, we would like to have the partial public financing reach a level where it allows people to run for office who might not otherwise be able to run for office. People who've been in office a long time have big war chests, and they have lots and lots of supporters who are willing to fund their campaigns. But the young person who's just getting into politics, who wants to change the system or who wants to bring fresh blood to the system, they may not be able to do that because they just don't have those resources.
You know, it's funny, we were talking about how we didn't really have a strong two-party system. If you actually had this system, you could actually have candidates challenging each other.
Yes.
You know, as opposed to, you know, the incumbent who no one runs for that seat until that person retires or leaves. Colin, I know you've got some.
Yeah, and I mean, this is what we see in the states that have the most robust public financing system for campaigns. So there's a few different models how this can work. The one that looks like it's probably not going to go forward, or I think it already failed, is the most robust form, which was debated over the last couple of years, where you basically get a big grant from the state, that you reach a threshold, and then you get money from the state to carry on the rest of your campaign. This is how it works in Maine, in Connecticut, and Arizona. The other model, which I might call the New York model, is a multiplier, a really aggressive multiplier. So you raise a certain amount of money, and then the state will match that times 8, for example.
I know the other side of that is that, you know, why should taxpayers pay for people's
Exactly,
campaigns?
and this is often the objection you get from taxpayers. The objection you often get from elected officials is, well, first, you know, I think some Democrats think it's only going to help Republicans, and I think second, they think there's going to be a lot of what they might term fringe candidates. In other words, people who aren't serious candidates or represent, you know, a very small segment of the district, then having all of this money to run, and you know, they might argue that that's a waste of public dollars.
Because I've heard that so much, and it kind of grinds my gears.
I figured it would, Cameron.
Only to the need of it's based in feeling and not actual logic. First of all, if you're afraid of a Republican coming against you, I'm sorry, we got to compete. We've got to have people who are willing to compete for a democracy. It can't just be handed to you.
I need to get to some of these questions. I've been letting them pile up. I'm trying to see if there's a pattern developing, but there's quite a few emails and calls. Some of them are about why things always die. And there's one, so many of the good government bills were referred to finance committees and then not heard, especially in the House. Even bills that didn't spend any money. What can we do about that? And then there was committee chairs have too much power. Decisions not to have a hearing on a bill should be made on the record by committee vote. Why is it so difficult to pass laws about when lawmakers can fundraise, who can donate and when? There seems to be like no-brainers. What's the rationale behind resistance? That was Eric and Kailua, Daniel via email, and a viewer email. Let's talk some more about campaign finance. We've just started talking about it. Robert, I know ethics is there's a different regulatory scheme for campaign spending, but are we getting better at regulating campaign spending? Are there things that are pending that would control that?
So, I mean, just to be clear, I do represent the State Ethics Commission, and there is a separate campaign spending commission. One example that I think is a positive improvement is that we have now prohibited lobbyists from making campaign contributions during the entire session, 5 days before and 5 days after as well, which I think it's a pretty good step in the right direction. You know, lobbyists are fundamentally by nature the ones being paid by special interests to advance bills or ideas, and to basically say you can't be giving money at the same time. So we're trying to break that apart. People will still say, well, they can give money elsewhere. Other times, yes, absolutely, we need, you know, better reform. In addition, we do have a bill that is quite important, which would restrict not only contractors from making campaign contributions, but their immediate family members as well, which I think is a significant bill. I think there is a New York Times report which showed that roughly I think is 1/5 of all political contributions were coming from a very small discrete group of government contractors, which is fundamentally a definition of pay to play. And I think that bill is probably the most important bill this session right now.
I think that the tone of these questions goes to lawmakers basically protecting themselves, and how is there a way to overcome that? Cameron, I know that bothers you in particular, but is there a way to overcome that?
Yeah, there
when
is.
they've got all the clout and they've got all the rules.
There's several ways. There are several ways, and don't get me wrong, I'm very proud of the steps that our lawmakers have taken. However, I can't give you a 3-year-long parade for taking the smallest of steps. So one of the things that could have been done was submit it to them at least 4 times, because I was on every submittal between this speaker and the speaker in the last session. Stop having bills that have absolutely no financial appropriation go to Fin to die.
Finance, yeah.
Yes. How is it that I can watch a bill get a positive vote from 25 lawmakers, get all the way to finance, and Kyle Yamashita not hear a single bill? Why is Kyle Yamashita the grim reaper of every good government bill that we have? And why is it that after time and time again of coming to leadership, coming to caucus members and saying this is a problem we're having, and they acknowledge that it's a problem, nothing is being done?
I mean, Colin, is there a way of changing something like that?
Well, the viewer's question is an interesting one, because unlike a lot of policy bills, it's not clear who really is against the reform bills, right? It's not like there's often an organized constituency who are testifying against these bills. It really does come from the legislators themselves, for the most part, who think that they're cumbersome. I mean, I think that most legislators, and they are honest, and they, I think, in many cases find that these bills will slow down the system. I've heard lots of legislators say, this is just all about process. This is not something my constituents really care about. They care about results. And I think that there is a perception that there's kind of a small group of, good government scolds out there who bring this up, but it's not the sort of thing that they really want to spend their time on. They want to deliver affordable housing. I'm just giving you the aggressive version of why a legislator might think that this is not something worth supporting. And I think the other biggest and most important point is the current system works for them. For anyone who wonders why committee chairs have so much power, why the legislature is structured the way it is, it's because legislators want it that way. This system is a system that the majority find agreeable. Now, that might not be something that the public views as agreeable, but if you want to change it, then you've got to call your legislator and tell them that this is important to you. You want to see the rules change. You want committee chairs to have, for example, less power. Because I think for most legislators, they don't think this is a voting issue, and frankly, they're often right.
Yeah. Judith Mills, you watch the legislature. What do you think the problem is? Is it that the way they just sort of funnel everything through just a handful of people?
Well, I think Colin has explained it pretty well. We agree that things should not go to the Finance Committee if there's no expenditure involved. It's burdensome to funnel everything into that bottleneck, and even if there's no intentional problem there, it just jams everything up. Right. And if you recall the end of last session, nothing could get done because there was just no time left to do it. So we don't really understand why that is still in place, because it's been suggested and pushed that rule changes.
Well, I think Colin is certainly right. I mean, it's the leadership that refers bills.
Yes, but that, at least it's not clear to me how that is obviously helpful to the leadership themselves. The issue of chairs being able to control, I can understand why they would want to keep that. It goes to their ability to control what they want to pass and what they don't want to pass. But in terms of just bottlenecking everything into the 2 finance committees, it doesn't seem to be useful at all.
We have a John from Magic Sands asks, nepotism is a staple in Hawaii and it breeds corruption at all levels of government. Wasn't that something they did do something about?
Yes, that was one of the fully commissioned bills that was recommended. The state has now banned nepotism for functionally, again, I don't want to get too much in the weeds, but functionally, at every level. And particularly for the executive branch, there is now a public good cause exception, because there are some circumstances, like, for example, trying to find a teacher on a neighbor island in a rural area. There may not be any other candidate. So we've created a public good cause exception. So the idea is the public can see exactly why that exception's been granted.
How do you define nepotism in these laws? I mean, what's the degree of relativity that gets you into a nepotism and not, because, I mean, that's my cousin.
It is 2 degrees of consanguinity, I believe, and forgive me, but it is clearly defined of who it is, and it is, what you would expect, and it includes Hanai relatives as well. So it's defined, and we've had, I think now, approximately 15 good cause exceptions. I mean, the idea is you are definitely seeing people being aware of the fact that nepotism is prohibited. You're not allowed to supervise, hire, a number of different exceptions. A point of controversy is the legislature basically said we want to oversee ourselves, and so they passed rules prohibiting nepotism. Senate's always had them. The House has now passed rules for themselves, so they self-govern themselves.
I mean, is it a widespread problem that's actually causing corruption, or do you think any of you who've observed it?
I mean, this is something the Ethics Commission fought for. So I mean, I just want to stress, we got complaints about it all the time, and when we dug into it, we rarely found corruption. But the fact that somebody would see it, think it's a problem, it goes to that confidence in government, issue. Right? So that's why we wanted to create a bright line rule saying this is prohibited. And if there's situations where it's needed, it's going to be public why this exception was granted.
A lot of people in this state end up working where their parents may have. Right. It's something that I've seen when I just take a step back from it. And to Robert's point is we do have actually really good nepotism laws, especially over the past, I think, like 2 years. They've become very, very strong. So I know at Common Cause we feel very strong.
I mean, this in some ways is an old tradition in politics. You hire your relatives to work in your office.
That's who you trust.
Yeah, that's who you trust. And, famously Harry Truman did this when he was in the Senate. I mean, lots of members of Congress in D.C. used to do this back in the day. But I mean, I'm glad that it looks like this has changed thanks to Robert's work.
So here's just a good blanket question. Now, one thing I wanted to make one distinction is that we often lump together in our heads the lawmakers and the people who work for government. Like nepotism. You mentioned a teacher in a school. I can't imagine it would be a surprise to have, a mom or a dad who's the principal of a school and a daughter or son who's a teacher in a school. That must happen fairly often, and but that's within the executive branch as opposed to the lawmakers, which is a different sort of world. But I wanted to hear, this is Candace writes, are the penalties for violating the rules or laws stiff enough? Colin, why don't you take that one on? I mean, is anybody really afraid of getting caught?
I mean, I think this is one of the positive reforms that was made after the Foley Commission. I think that there's more. My sense is that there are more resources to investigate, and that the fines and penalties are much higher. And there's another bill which maybe Robert can explain, which would actually allow you to act more quickly for relatively small fines. Isn't that right?
Yeah. So the Ethics Commission. So the Foley Commission recommended strongly on the criminal side. So the criminal side has much more robust. It follows the federal quite a bit. Rules on criminal behavior. In addition, the Ethics Commission can issue $5,000 fines per violation. So there was again, and most of our cases are all very public. We issued, I think, a $350,000 fine recently, just to give you an idea of the scope of how big those fines can be.
Who's that?
That was the well-publicized case of an athletic director. Right. So.
But a lot of that was the money wasn't that based on the amount of money that he took?
So it was each transaction, so each check, et cetera, could be a violation. And so, it can be significant. And more so, I mean, I would stress being found to have violated the ethics code, particularly for a state employee, has pretty bad ramifications. We've had people who've emailed us later and said, I can't get any jobs now because everyone can Google me and find that I violated the ethics code, right? And would you hire that person?
Bad.
Right? Well, yeah.
But
I mean, the point being is that it is a harsh penalty, and it's one that we exercise as part of our job.
Okay, let me got a couple more questions about campaign spending. Is there an effort to increase the number of reporting deadlines for campaign fundraising and spending? Is that even necessary? So the question kind of answers itself, by the way. This is from someone named Bill. I'm not sure the form came in. But one thing that always struck me is the campaign spending deadlines create the situation where everybody's filing at the same time. You don't know whether someone's gotten a contribution for a while after it happens. Judy Mills, do you think that we could do better with campaign spending reporting and deadline and so on?
I think we could do better. I also think that the Campaign Spending Commission is attempting to do better. They've this session they will pick up a couple more staff, I believe, and it's going to give them the opportunity to be more on top of things. And so yes, I think we could do better, and I think they're aware of that and they're working on that.
How is dark money operating? Colin, do any reform bills cover dark money? Dark money is kind of a broad definition, but in Hawaii, are we any better at that? Dark money is basically money coming from people we don't know who they are, running campaigns with no names on them and so on, right?
So maybe Camron knows if there's a bill that's still alive that considers dark money. I'm not aware that there is, but I mean, we've seen plenty of examples of this. So this can be money from a super PAC where you're not exactly sure where the origins of that money were. I mean, I think we saw this most famously in a congressional campaign a few years ago with Jill Takuda and her opponent, who managed to get a dark money PAC, which we learned was pretty well funded by the cryptocurrency industry to run a lot of ads, but it wasn't clear where the money was coming from. It wasn't local money. And so I think that's when people are talking about dark money, that tends to be what they mean. I mean, I'll defer to Robert because he's an attorney. I mean, he understands the legal rules better than I do. But I mean, my understanding is that that's still a very difficult thing to regulate because of the Supreme Court's ruling in Citizens United. Go ahead.
I was actually going to maybe throw it a little bit to Camron too. Sure. I think there was a bill that was looking at restricting foreign contributions, and I think it might be interesting to see what type of ramification that would have, particularly in context of what we've seen on a national level.
I thought foreign contributions were already illegal.
No, sir.
Well,
really?
well, so the definition of foreign, would be, non-Hawaii corporations.
Oh, non-Hawaii.
So when you see,
but you can't make because I think
So
Dalton
here-
Tanaka went to prison for taking money from his
Correct, but
father.
there can be a certain threshold, right? So first of all, it is corporations. So let's say you exist in a corporation that's maybe 8% foreign owned. Under federal law, they can still give because they're still majority owned red, white, and blue American. However, what we're saying, after following the lead of different bodies, including San Diego, is that we want to make it to where we don't want you, if you have a certain stake that is foreign owned, we don't think you should be giving money in our elections. And as we see the growing threat globally, we see more and more resolve for that. And it's a great bill. It was led by Senator Chris Lee. I think you had over 15 legislators vote on it and vote yes for it. But one legislator was able to kill it in finance.
Yes.
I don't understand, again, why 15 legislators said, yes, this is a good piece of work, we're proud of this, let's push it through. But because he's overwhelmed with the volume that comes in, also bills that don't have an appropriation for financial needs, he couldn't get around to scheduling it. So our democracy could be at risk in certain ways because somebody can't get around to it.
We're gonna in just a minute or so, because we're kind of moving along in time. I do want to talk about some of the big picture things that could change and maybe have some effect. We did get someone, and I'll give this. What about getting the ledge to form a Doge in our state system to find abuse and corruption like the administration is doing at the federal level? Donald from Honolulu.
We can't even give out free meals for kids, and we want to go and create. Never mind. Go ahead.
Well, I know, but I mean, I think that let's give the questioner the benefit of the doubt here. We haven't done anything like that.
No.
Yeah.
I mean, so Doge is not an approach I would agree with for government reform.
We have plenty of our own billionaires
But it
here.
doesn't mean you can't effectively reform, outdated civil service requirements or look at different ways to solve a lot of our problems with procurement or hiring. I mean, I think that there is some interest. So I think that there would be room or support for some kind of blue ribbon commission that would do it in a responsible and careful way. I mean, politically in Hawaii, this can be sometimes difficult because some of the most powerful political players are the public sector unions, but that's not to say that HGA and the others wouldn't necessarily be opposed to a thoughtful approach. But I don't think you would get very far with a hatchet Doge approach around here.
I don't know what sense would it make if don't we have like 35% of our state jobs left unfilled right now?
Vacant.
So we're going to go and cut the jobs that we can't fill right now.
Well, we're so ineffective at actually hiring people that we save plenty
Maybe
of
we
money
should
that
listen
way.
to the rule suggestions that advocates give because that would produce efficiency. It doesn't always have to be the cut of a job to produce a state's being more efficient, such as not having to send bills to a finance committee when they have no appropriation.
Okay.
I don't know. I've
horse is-
said it for 2 years and nobody seems to hear me. If I say it 3 times, Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, maybe somebody will hear me.
Okay. All right. So a couple of questions here again about penalties and criminal actions. One question, please ask about the unidentified lawmaker who took $35,000 and might still be serving in office. Should the state institute mandatory reporting? If you see corruption, must you report it? Can the Ethics Commission refer a case for criminal prosecution? I know you can. That's you have done that.
Yes.
Okay. And then that was another question for Frank. But getting back to this, do you have at the Ethics Commission the power and ability and the staff to like go after something like this? Because this was a tip that came out of a federal investigation. Civil Beat reported it, didn't name names, but there's seems to be something there. Can you guys put like a task force on something and go after something?
So just to get the background of that story is that as a part of the investigation that led to the trial of 2 legislators is that there was an unnamed third legislator that had reportedly received $35,000, and it was I think the word was high-level or prominent legislator. So the Civil Beat had gotten that information, and I won't go through the details of it.
Well, they looked through a blacked out
Correct.
copy. Yeah.
They were able to get that information, but the name was not revealed, and so nobody that I'm aware of outside of the federal investigators and the U.S. Attorney's Office knows who this individual is. And so I was publicly quoted as saying, yes, the Ethics Commission, there's different layers to regulate things, and this happens at the federal level, happens at the county level and the state level. There's criminal penalties that are usually overseen by the prosecutors, and we have civil laws like the Ethics Commission, the ethics laws, and the ethics laws have easier standards of proof. So, potentially if you can't go after them criminally, we can go after them civilly, and that was the intent. I understand sometimes that they have informants, they have reasons why they can't share it, and so be it. But again, if we were able to get more information, yes, we'd absolutely go after it, and
So
we've done those kinds of things before.
Yeah, who are you going to call? Like if I'm a citizen or I'm a employee and I know someone is taking a bribe, the Fed's done almost all the prosecuting. The police department, people might be, they're not government watchdogs so much. I mean, who are you going to call?
So, I would encourage people to call anyone that they feel comfortable with, but I will note that our complaints form system that we have on our website, we accept anonymous complaints, so you don't have to reveal yourself. Last year, we processed over 500 complaints that came in through our system, and a lot of those, I mean, a small but important portion of those become enforcement cases for us.
And how public is it when you do a case?
So a complaint that comes in, a lot of times, unfortunately, this may not be our jurisdiction, so we'll try to push the person to the right place, right? Sometimes someone just wants to complain about their private landlord or something, okay? We can't really help you there. But where it is a state employee, where there's an ethics violation, we will investigate, and then eventually I'll go to charge. Any settlement or any hearing that we have is public. So whenever we take action, you're going to see that. Reasonably so, our investigations are confidential until such time they've gotten to the point where we're going to hearing or we got to charge. Because the allegation that the Ethics Commission's investigating you is pretty significant. And where you have a whistleblower, you want to protect that whistleblower.
How many state-led criminal investigations into corruption have there been in the past 5 years?
I'm not sure I can answer that, but I think we can say probably not very many. And I think part of the reason why 2 years ago, they stood up a special AG's division to be able to give them the ability to hire investigators to be able to do some of these things. And so, I think it's a reasonable question to ask soon, like, what's the result of that? What's that looking like?
I think that's the public's issue, though, is that you say that we have
All this stuff.
great stuff and we're making these steps, but however, that case right there, not somebody taking a lawmaker out to eat, that case with $35,000, that's what the public wants to know is being done about. And here we are 3 years later with no answer, and we're pushing the statute of limitations now.
Well, I think that, I'm not going to state an opinion, but I do want to move on to some bigger picture things now, because we do have several questions. Why doesn't the legislature stay in session longer? They should be required to stay longer. I think he wants them to stay and not make any more money. But still, that bottleneck and that crash at the end of the session is the excuse for a lot of the stuff that doesn't get
That is
passed.
a hot topic right now. I mean, is it being considered to have a full-time legislature or a year-round legislature, maybe not full-time legislature. And everybody who's sitting here has had reasons to have opinions on that. And
what's your opinion? Does the league have a position?
I actually think it's a good idea. I'm a little confused why other states that are comparable in size and complexity to ours don't seem to need it, but what we see is this pushing of everything all together creates a problem for the public who wants to testify. It creates a problem for the legislators themselves who need to push to get things through.
They are rushing. I
yes,
gotta
they
say.
are.
I mean, when you talk to them, there's some days you can't even reach a legislator. They're
Weeks.
running from committee to be. Yeah,
Exactly.
Yeah.
So there are reasons to think that that's a good plan, and I'm not speaking for the league here, I'm just speaking for myself. I think that there's a good argument for it. And we were talking earlier about that has some bearing on ethics.
Let me ask you, Colin. I'm going to read this question first because it's right on the point, and I want to give the viewer credit. Is part of the problem that there are too many bills introduced each year in a short session, and powerful committee chairs are trying to weed through tons of legislation, and bills about reforming government go to the bottom of the list. But Colin, how do you see a workable full-time legislator?
Yeah, you sure did. Yeah. This is not something the Salary Commission, of course, could have decided. But now that it looks like they're going to be paid some of the very highest salaries in the entire country, I think we can expect a full-time legislature. Now, formally moving to a 12-month legislature would probably require a constitutional amendment, but you could spread out the 60 days of floor sessions throughout the year and have committees meet in the interim. I think that would be possible through some internal rules changes, and that might provide more space to fully consider all these bills. I mean, the other thing, so the legislators are, really working hard and everything is jammed up, and so I agree with the viewer. That's one of the reasons I think good government bills often don't rise to the top, because there's just no time. I think it would also give citizens and nonprofit organizations more time to respond. I mean, things move so quickly that by the time the public is aware of what's going on, it's over, or it's already, it's been rejected by the chair, or it's already, at the end, we're done and it's in conference and we don't really know what's going on. I mean, I've never really heard a great argument for why we shouldn't move to a full-time legislature, except that maybe it would be more expensive and that it would be a change to this notion of a citizen legislature, that people are going to go back and have other jobs to their farms, exactly. And there are some states, just like you mentioned, where they have true citizen legislatures. I mean, in New Mexico, legislators are not paid. In New Hampshire, I think they make $175 a year, and they have real outside jobs. They're doctors, they're dentists. But our legislature is kind of in this weird in-between stage where most of our legislators actually are professional legislators. I think there's about 20 who have significant outside employment. And so it wouldn't, and now that they're getting paid very competitive salaries, I don't think it would be a huge, it would be easier for them to work full-time. And one thing that we could require, or could have required, although the Salary Commission couldn't have done this, for higher salaries and moving to a full-time legislature, is to restrict outside employment. I mean, the U.S. House of Representatives, for example, if you're in Congress, you can only make a certain amount of money. I believe it's $25,000 of outside income.
Let me ask Robert, in the Ethics Commission, I know you can go to the website and you can see what employment legislators have. You can even see that their spouses make a certain amount of money. It's these broad ranges, so you don't really know if someone's making a ton of money, but or if they're only making a little bit. Let's talk about this for 2 or 3 minutes, because I think that of all these questions that we're getting, an awful lot of them revolve around the control that comes from having this overburden of there's lack of time and too much material to go through, the focusing on certain people because you have to keep it organized. So if you start, what are the mechanisms that could lead to a legislature solving those problems? And one of them would be disclosure, right? If someone's making close to $100,000 for a job right now that only occupies them for a little more than 4 months, I mean, how does the public know, and should all that be disclosed? It is disclosed, I know, but.
So, I mean, maybe if I can indirectly answer your question, at the Foley Commission.
It was a terrible question, so
when the Foley Commission, we received a number of recommendations or requests from the public, which included things like, we want to be able to see the testimony, a week in advance. We want to follow the Sunshine Law, which requires 7 days notice of a hearing.
Sunshine Law, right.
Right, and again, functionally, when you think about the legislature, which has to rush through all the bills in a period of about 4 weeks to get through one house, then to get to the other, it's virtually impossible to comply with the Sunshine Law, at least the timing requirements of it. I can go on, but a lot of the issues revolve around the fact that the legislature is so short.
Well, that's their main excuse for not following the Sunshine Law.
Correct. But even if we were to legitimately say you should do these things, really that was the impediment. And so the Constitution says that they must convene in the 3rd week of January. And during an election year, you fundamentally have primaries, happening sort of in the midsummer period, right? And so there really isn't a lot of room during an election year to do much, but in a non-election year, you could potentially spread things out.
Good point.
Yeah. And then the other thing that we considered is that if you look at just since the Constitution was drafted, the increase in size and scope of responsibilities legislators have had, I would argue functionally they are full-time employees today, because if you sit on a neighborhood board or if you're a constituent and you call your legislator in August, you're not expecting to get a message saying, sorry, I'll be back in 3 months. You expect an answer right away. And so realistically, they are full-time employees, and I do think we can now look at ways to extend our legislature in a way that can address all these other issues.
Do you think the Sunshine Law now at the state, at the county level, they're following the Sunshine Law? That probably could be one of the excuses they could accept for the size of their pay raise that they got. Do you think, Judy, do you think that there's an argument to be that the legislature should just follow the Sunshine Law and be around for as long as it takes to get stuff done?
We would love for them to follow the Sunshine Law, but you can't follow, for the reasons that have just been explained, you can't follow the Sunshine Law given the calendar now. So it would be an enhancement for the public if they could follow the Sunshine Law, which would mean that you would have to stretch it out. And that gets us pretty much to, if not full-time, close to year-round.
And that deals with an awful lot of the questions that we're getting. Camron, what are your own thoughts about that, about how we could somehow get the legislature? First of all, do you agree that the legislature should be in session for a way longer period of time?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think we as citizens want our elected officials working for us full time. I think that there was a time when America was much smaller, and the scope of the legislature was a lot smaller as well, to where they could be citizens and be legislators at the same time. But now I need you full time. And I don't think there's anything wrong with wanting that. I think that that has been something that the Speaker of the House has expressed that she's very interested in and would like to see. So I do applaud her for that leadership, and I'm hoping that we do see movement on that. It does seem like more of a math game of division to hit the constitutional requirement.
Okay, actually, we've got to stop now. We've hit our hour.
Look at that.
Speaking of math,
So mahalo to you folks for joining us tonight. And we want to thank our guests, Camron Hurt from Common Cause Hawaii, Judith Mills-Wong from the League of Women Voters of Hawaii, political analyst Colin Moore, and Robert Harris from the State Ethics Commission. Next week, we discuss Oahu's landfill dilemma. The deadline to close the current site in West Oahu is getting closer, but the site picked by the mayor faces rejection at the state capitol. So where can the landfill be done? Please join us then. I'm Daryl Huff for Insights on PBS Hawaii. Aloha.
Local broadcasts of Insights on PBS Hawaiʻi are made possible by the support of viewers like you. Mahalo.